Hello, everybody. It's Steph Aubrey here from the Amusement Network. And today I'm joined by Marcus Kravis, who you all know very well, who is the operator of the Arkade in Minehead. And I've invited Marcus on today to talk about recent developments, especially with solar power. Hello, Marcus.
Hi, Steph. How are you doing?
Very well indeed. So, Marcus, you posted on Facebook last week that you'd finally gone fully off-grid solar at the Arkade, which is an incredible achievement. But can you talk us through how it came about?
Well, it came about a couple of years ago when I got my renewal price for, my electricity, and I started thinking, well, maybe solar could be a worthwhile option if you could produce enough of it. And then, of course, I got my renewal through back this time last year, slightly August 2022. And I looked at the price of that and thought, well, that decision's made then. How do I go about this? And so that was really the start of an awful lot of research, an awful lot of interneting, an awful lot of watching YouTube, an awful lot of speaking to people, included me going to the solar show at the NEC, included me, taking a MCS installers course along with my electricians. So that was really the start of it. Probably this time last year, and it was more like a panic rather than or wouldn't this night be a nice thing to do?
So initially, did you look around maybe for an approved installer that could do all that hard work for you and find that there wasn't anything there for you?
Well, the problem there was it was difficult. I would like to say it's difficult to get anyone to answer the phone. I mean, it did. Yeah, I think from the solar installer's point of view, it did go a little bit mad. Then when you're looking at the bigger installers that can do the job, they're dealing with the likes of Lidl and local authority and things like that. And so, of course, I was a bit down the pecking order. And of course, my pockets maybe aren't as deep.
Right.
So there was, I had to be able to afford it. And that's where I started looking around and thinking, well, it ain't rocket science. How can we do it? So that's when I decided to do it ourselves. And well, I would say it hasn't been that difficult, but if you speak to anybody who knows me, and I've bored people to death, and has actually probably been a little bit.
What would your advice be then to get, if somebody was interested in getting started on this process, what would you say the first thing they should do?
The first thing they should do, well, this is what I did. The first thing I did was speak to a few people. But there is an awful lot out there online, and it's not difficult. But what I would first of all do is, assuming you're a fair enough size amusement arcade, you know what you're using electricity, download your data. I can bore you to death. I know I use 17 units in half an hour, so I use 34 units an hour. That's 34 kilowatts. So downloading my data from British Gas, bless them. And work from that. And the nice thing about our industry is, it might not be the same for everybody, but it is for me, is that we tend to operate and we tend to open when the sun's out. So when it gets the winter, we tend to close a little bit earlier. So the key for all of this is battery storage.
Right.
So yesterday, for example, for some reason, the weather was such that we weren't quite generating enough. So we were using battery storage, but I still had enough battery storage. So I think the first thing, you could phone up an installation company, see what they say. If it's a reasonable sized job, I think they'll all run for the hills, if you can find one. Or if you're thinking of doing it yourself, or thinking of doing it on a more local level with a local installer, where maybe you can get involved with them, then it is a case of working out what you're using, and you do have to be really, boring, and work out what you're using at what times. Right. I think something that a lot of people did over the last year, and I've spoken to operators who are turning machines off, and indeed we went down that route last November, where we actually made the decision to close in the winter, in the week. And then when we opened at the weekends, a lot of machines, not a lot of machines, but machines were turned off. And I can tell you what wattage my machines now use.
Right.
And it is having that data. So once you know what you're using, then you can work out what you need.
Okay.
So, and I could bore you with the details if you want.
No, I'm interested because obviously this is a subject that not many people know an awful lot about, and now you know an awful lot about it. So once you work out how much you need, does that relate to how many panels you're going to need and how big a battery you're going to need?
Yes, so I worked out. I mean, I'm fortunate here. I've got quite a big roof, as I think my photo showed. I've actually got more panels than is on the roof. I've got other, they're everywhere. I've actually got 152 panels. So I've
Right.
got 152 panels, they're 700 watt each. My maximum, as they call it, peak, my kilowatt peak, as they call it in the trade, is 106.4 kilowatts.
Right.
Uh, so you can relate that to units. It's probably the easiest way to do it. By no means do I generate 106 kilowatts. The average rule of thumb is that you will generate about 5 hours worth of that. So
Okay.
theoretically, on a good summer's day, I could generate 500 kilowatts of electricity.
Okay.
Which, bearing in mind, I use about 400, well, 340 to 400 a day, depending on how busy we are.
Okay.
Means that I've got enough left over to charge my batteries. So when it gets dark, I should be able to run on batteries. The lights here, this is batteries now.
Right.
I think you said I was 100% off grid. We're actually in about 75% off grid because the electricians here now transferring others over.
Okay. And is this something that you can do on a gradual basis, add a few panels and then invest in more as you go along? Or is it an all or nothing situation, really?
No, I think you could, because we've done, we have, for example, my AGC or my over 18 area of the arcade, that is staying on grid for the time being until we know it's stable enough. Something that has been happening in, I'm speaking to a chap at the inverter manufacturers, is we're getting I could bore you. Something's happening which involves the inverters going into a safety reset for
Right.
takes about 30 seconds to 50 seconds. So we're still at that stage where we need to find out why that's happening, and we'll find out why that's happening and solve the problem. So what we're
Because you
doing,
obviously don't want to be interrupting people in the middle of their games or whatever. If
so it's
they're
not so bad if you're playing a pusher, but if you're playing a slot
video
machine,
game or something.
well, video games are not the end of the world. You give them
Yeah. Yeah.
that's how we look at it. We're quite relaxed
Right.
over
I
it.
suppose you're gaming
It's,
machines and
let's
things.
just say we didn't do it until after the season finished. We didn't want
Right.
to do it in August.
Right.
And so actually that's what we're doing. So the electrician's here now, and he's transferring the other circuit over to that.
Right.
And we're sort of now just testing it out. And I was on a WhatsApp call with a chap in Turkey this morning, and we finally got the little piece of equipment. It's called a data logger wired in, and we were just sorting out passwords so he can access that, and he can just try and see what's causing that fault. It could be something silly. It's probably something silly. It could be a setting in the inverter.
Yeah.
There's an awful lot of settings.
I'm sure that people watching this will be screaming at me to ask, what's the return on investment on here? How quickly do you think you can see the benefits, other than obviously the environmental benefits, but the financial good sense of making this investment?
But when I first looked, it was probably 5 years when we were looking at 25p a unit. When you're looking, then suddenly electricity costs went up to 70p a unit. And suddenly it was like 2 years. We now, of course, what's happening now is we've gone from this time last year not being able to even get an electricity to quote to getting emails every day from 3 different brokers wanting to save electricity. If I get a new contract in November, which is going to be cheaper, it would still be 3 or 4 years doing it ourselves, maybe 4. I'm going tops 4. Now, if you look at my one big ticket that I installed, big plug for David Garforth there at Concept Games, I gradually did that over 3 years because I couldn't physically at the time couldn't afford to just go and do the whole thing. That time's flown by. So not only have we installed them over 3 years, they've probably all been installed for 3 years. And I've not bought a redemption ticket for 3 years now. I
Yeah,
mean, it's just the thought of buying a load of redemption tickets seems truly bonkers to me now.
it will be no time
Oh,
at all,
bye-bye.
effectively.
And
Yeah.
bottom line is, if you weren't paying for your return on investment or your capital investment, you'd be paying the electricity company.
Mm,
And
mm.
I have a few beefs with, I think how the major electricity companies or suppliers have behaved in the last year is probably shameful and will be the next big scandal.
Yeah.
Sorry.
No, I'm totally with you there. What do you have to do in terms of, do you have to notify the local authority that you're planning to go down the route of putting solar panels on? What are your responsibilities from that perspective?
If you're putting planning permission on a commercial, right, it's changing constantly. I needed planning permission to put solar panels on this because it's on the arcade because it's commercial premises. However, I've got another arcade. I did forget about I've got an AGC in the town, which separate building. Didn't need planning permission for that because of the size, and that was done under permitted development. So you do need planning permission if it's commercial premises, but not necessarily depending on the size. And I wish I should know the more details, but I still can't. I still couldn't rule out the current legislation or guidance. What you do need to be careful of is conservation officers and conservation societies. Our local conservation society did actually object to my solar panels because you could see them from the conservation area. That's becoming more prevalent, and the conservation officer did object to the solar panels on my AGC in the town, but as it turns out, they're being done under permitted development if I go down that route. So you just got to check. You just got to check with someone who, a planning agent or someone who does your plans, and they'll speak to the planning officer. You could also, it's not difficult. Pick up the phone, speak to a planning officer. That said, it's not guaranteed. You'd think in today's world that we're trying to save the planet, especially seaside resorts.
I was thinking that you would think, wouldn't you, that they'd be encouraging people, particularly a business like an arcade, which is, a sort of using a lot of energy, often coastal, prime locations, as you say, operating on sunny days. Perfect situation. You'd actually think that there might be grants and things available to encourage people to do this. Did you look into the fact was there any help available to you?
Nothing out there at all. And it was slightly disappointing. And I think two things that disappointed me was not being able to get hold of an installer to do the job. To be fair, there was one I contacted on Facebook that did actually get back to me. And to be fair, but by that time I was too far down the road. I'd almost contact him to help us out with the stuff we maybe were getting. I must have had one of those days where I thought I'd bitten off more than we could chew, and was starting to panic. So that was slightly disappointing. With regard to the costs are coming down. Now I make no secret, I imported my solar panels directly from China. That was a lot easier than I thought it would be. Slightly scary if you've never done it before. And what I would say is you do need to make sure, and this is the other issue, is you say about notifying the local authority and planning permission. You do need your distribution network operator, DNOs in the trade they're called. You do need their approval. So one of the reasons we are off grid totally, and I don't have to be, my inverters can connect to the grid, is that the DNO hasn't replied back to me yet. Now that's again frustrating, but I know people who, I know one solar farm somewhere near Yeovil way that has the planning permission all ready to go, and the DNO, district network operators, basically said we can't get you a grid connection until 2035. So they've been caught napping, they've been caught asleep. We in the southwest are with what was Western Power is now National Grid. If you speak to any of the renewable energy companies, they will tell you there's a lot worse out there as well. When you start talking Yeovil Way, and I don't know what they're called, but they've been caught napping, the DNOs. The infrastructure's not there. Suddenly, I think the spike in electricity prices has obviously created a surge in demand,
Right.
a surge of installations, and I would say they can't cope.
They
I'm
can't
not an
cope with
expert,
it.
but that's
Yeah. Yeah. Because I know of people who did it a while back and are actually selling their excess back into the system. So that, I suppose that's why you need the DNO, is it? Sort of to...
Yeah, and also I've got, without going into details, but I've got 400. I've got batteries running at 496 volts. So I've got 400 amps. So what you got to be, they need, and it's rightly so, they need to make sure that what's coming into my premises can cope with, if everything, say my inverter's failed, they need to know that I'm not going to take out half the local substation. Because although you have protections and everything, they will look at worst case scenario.
Yes.
And
Yeah.
so this is why we've gone down the road we've gone at the moment. We're going on with, I've got enough capacity that I can go off grid.
Right.
Now it could be interesting come winter, come the weather, but hopefully by that time we will have those final things sorted out, and I'll actually be able to connect to the grid, sell back to the grid, and take from the grid when I want to.
Yes.
Ideal scenario is in the summer I'll be selling it to the grid.
And obviously, with the kind of equipment that you've got, you know, it would be, I imagine, dangerous to have any surges or outages or anything like that, any sort of lack of complete is that a concern? Is there any aspect?
Well, we've got, without boring again with the details, we've got two 50 kilowatt hybrid inverters by a company named Ates, been really easy to deal with, really easy to, the support's been great. But my concern is what happens if it all fails?
Yeah.
What happens if one day it goes down? Not only regardless of whether it's connected to the grid, what happens? So I've got a nice little switch. I can go up there, go dunk, and we're back on grid.
Yes.
Now that can be set to be actual automatic as well. So that is automatic. So theoretically, that will automatically transfer power to the grid in case of total failure. That is what we plan to do there. So if everything goes wrong and there's a big bang one day, and we'll on the phone to China or Turkey going, well, there is actually a company in Europe, there is actually a distributor in Europe, I think, that we know that we're not going to be.
You've got a safety net.
we got a slight backup. I'm brave, but I'm not that brave.
You are brave. I mean, that's really coming across to me, and I think people listening to this might be thinking, Marcus knows a lot about this. He's quite technically minded. He's obviously interested in the way things work. Could I do this myself? Do you think the average arcade operator must, by their very nature, must be fairly used to dealing with machinery and equipment and have a certain amount of engineering now? So do you think this is something that most people might be able to cope with?
Funny enough, I was speaking to somebody the other day, and I said, he's been trying to get quotes from a company, and I was looking at his prices. I said, you're going to end up doing this yourself. I think for me, I mean, I designed all the mountains. They're all designed slightly differently. One of the things that happened was obviously got a structural engineering. That's something else I should say. If you're going to stick a load of solar,
so you're going to put all these things on the roof.
Commercial premises, pay the couple of grand to a consultant and get someone to make sure your roof can take it. As it happens, I was fortunate enough that the company I rang, his boss actually built the building back in the 70s,
Right.
which helped. But what he did say was, when I had a lovely plan that, as it happens, my son works for Kenza, so he drew me a little plan, and I had a lovely plan of 130 panels on the roof. And then the structural engineer came along and said, you're not putting any panels in the middle. And I went, oh, okay. So that then altered the design, which means suddenly I had more panels on my balcony than I was going to. but what it did do was made me think about my angles of my panels. So if you saw an aerial photograph if you saw a photograph, you'll see that they're in different angles. So even the panels on the north side of the roof are angled up, and so they're angled up slightly further.
Right.
So there's some very interesting design work going on using. I've never used is it trigonometry that you do at O level? We design triangles. I can't remember, but
Well, yes. That's not the thing to ask me.
I was, I was working at angles, and then of course you've got to take into account shading. So mine are all at slightly different angles, which isn't the best thing in the world.
I'm sure that there's an opportunity here, Marcus, for you to establish a consultancy to the arcade industry.
A million years. I think my children and my partner and everybody who knows me would hang me. But it again, there's an awful lot of people. There's an awful lot of information out there.
Yes.
The solar show was very interesting. Plug for an exhibition in September at the NEC.
Right.
That was very interesting. Also, I think it was the same day as a caravan show, so you can caravan and motorhome show. So you can do two things at once if you like. That was quite interesting. I found it. Another problem that I did have, going back to I know I'm jumping about a bit here.
No, it's fine.
Was that of course the distributors only wanted to sell to installers.
Right.
So
yes.
You got distributors just wanting to sell to installers, but of course I couldn't get an installer. So that's what probably led me to getting direct from China slightly.
Right.
And then eventually I've managed to persuade a couple once I had my MCS. I think my certificate. I think that's my test mark. 71% I got. Once I got that, I could wave that at them and say, "We know what we're doing." I would argue that.
So I just wanted to know a little bit more about that course that you did and how long it took. Was it challenging?
It was if you're not an electrician. Yeah, I mean, I booked myself and my electrician onto the same course. It was a 5-day course. It was done through through our electrical wholesalers. Wasn't overly expensive. It was a little bit more electrically minded than how would I say installation minded. But it allows if you're a qualified electrician, which my electrician is obviously, it allows him now to it allowed us to fill out those forms for the DNOs, and was it worth doing? Yes, it was worth doing. Did I get everything out of it I thought I'd get? No, but it's quite a minefield out there.
Right.
It is a minefield, but it's definitely worth doing. I think going back to your earlier question of can anyone do it? Do you know what? Get yourself on YouTube, have a look.
Yeah.
And it's not as difficult as maybe you'd think. The main difficulty is, and that's what happened there, is the electrician's still here because we're sorting out, is the electrical back end stuff. Actual fitting solar panels isn't, you can look at. The actual electrical stuff is a lot more complicated, and hence my electrician went on the course with me, and hence I'm always badgering him to finish. Let's get the job finished. And it's very satisfying when I download my data and I see that I used half the amount of it was over half. It was 2/3. I used a third of the amount of electricity on Saturday and Sunday than I did on Thursday. Right. And that was very satisfying. And
that's when you went fully operational.
Well, not, as I said, about 3/4 of the machines at the moment. So we're just now, literally we're here today putting another final circuit on, and that will then leave everything off grid, apart from we don't necessarily want to do the AGC yet, until we know we got confidence in what we've done.
Right, that was sort of my next question. Have you got the bug now? Are you keen to put solar panels on all your properties in an ideal world?
I've got the mountings, I've got an AGC in the town centre in Minehead. We've designed the mountings for that, designed the system for that. there's a cafe next door that would like to come in with me. Probably can't quite generate enough for both of us on that one. But it would seem illogical not to.
Right.
And of course, well, we've got accommodation business and pub business elsewhere, just in a place called Blue Anchor. We've got solar panels to fit onto the static caravans there. That should give me probably about 50 kilowatts of generator capacity. What we haven't done there yet is I've had these designed and specially made so they fit on a static caravan.
Right.
What we haven't done there is I haven't sorted out the rest of the purchase of the inverters and batteries, mainly down to cost and budget. So we've just got to work out whether we got enough. And there was a little bit of, let's see if this works first.
Yes, yes.
And
Before we throw ourselves in.
there was a bit of that, and I think that is the
Yeah.
next step, because the pressure was taken off there. And one of the things that has occurred was British Gas sent me an email one day, because that's who we get our electric from, and offered me what they called a blend and extend contract, which basically if I extended my contract for an extra year, this was a few months ago, they would reduce my electricity costs. So I snapped their hands off.
Yes. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
it was over nearly half my electricity costs there. So that took some of the immediate pressure off. Unfortunately, what British Gas haven't done is offered me the same contract at this location.
Right.
So I'm in a slight dispute with British Gas, because they won't seem to. I've pointed out they can't offer it to one customer, not the next.
Yes.
And I can't seem to get out of them what the criteria was for offering me that deal at one
That
location,
deal
but
in
not at
one
the other.
location.
And
Yeah.
I would suggest that anybody who's got an electricity contract with British Gas should maybe just ask the same question.
Yes. Yes. Blend and extend.
Blend and extend. Started it in May. They did.
There we go. There we go.
If you tweet blend and extend, if tweet is a thing, X or whatever, you'll probably find there's a tweet from me on there. I don't tweet very often. For me to tweet must mean that I'm a bit annoyed.
Yes, yes, absolutely, absolutely. Well, that's absolutely fascinating. Thank you so much for talking to us about it. Are you going to be at ACOS? Are you going to come up to ACOS or down to
if I've got any money left after I worked out what I've spent on the solar panels? Well, I would say, yeah, my budget's gone over. It always does. But I think actually there's a lot of stuff that needed doing, electrical work behind the scenes. And so
right?
we took the opportunity to do other stuff. So if I've got any budget to spend at ACOS, I might come along.
Well, I'm sure there'll be plenty of people asking you questions about what you've been up to, and how's the season been in general? How's business been?
Been okay. I was a little bit. I mean, it's been okay. I was a little bit concerned. I mean, the cost of living crisis at the moment is. I mean, you go in the supermarket to buy a loaf of bread, and before, in the old days, you buy a few things extra. You come out, you spend 50 quid.
Yeah.
And I think that's got to start hitting. It can't carry on as it is. The costs of like other costs and other household costs are going up. Insurance costs are going up. I mean, everybody I speak to, cost of living is affecting insurance, car insurance. Don't quite know how, but it is. And so I'm quite relieved the season wasn't as bad. It was quite good.
Yeah.
But what we have to remember is that that money is worth 10% less than it was last year.
Yeah.
In fact, to be honest, realistically, it would seem to be worth 20% less. So people are still coming. They're still coming away to the seaside, still coming away and holidaying in the UK. But I think this winter will be tough.
Be a tough one.
Or at least we'll find out how bad it is out there. And it is, as I said, I think we talk about electricity price scandals. I would love to have a look at some of this pricing in supermarkets.
That's a fight for another day.
A tube of Premier cheese is now £1.85. I mean, the world
And on that note, I think we're going to say, Marcus, thank you so much. It's been really, really fascinating talking to you.